About to start, okay? There's chairs over here. All right, guys. Brilliant. Thanks for coming. No, we actually, thank you for the audience, okay? We actually were wondering whether we're just going to be talking into the camera. But as it is, it's wonderful to have you here, okay? I'm Ġorġ, okay? And I think I've been in comics for too long now. I think it's about time I retired, so it's a good thing I've got the next generation here with me who have ably taken over.
Ġorġ, we're not even the next generation.
No, days are. Which is why Christabelle is here, in actual fact, okay? Let me first of all introduce the people who will actually be chatting about this. There's Dean Fenech, Audrienne Degiorgio, there's Peter Magro, and Christabelle Mizzi, okay? I will introduce them separately as we go along. I hope you're hearing me. I do have a teacher's voice, but I am also getting old, so the teacher's voice is also getting old. Quick roll call about what this is about. Maltese comics have not always been there. Quite the opposite. In fact, when comics were developing in the UK, in Italy, in the States, etc., Maltese comics were practically non-existent. We did have a few good cartoonists like Robert Caruana Dingley, people like John Neville, who did an enormous amount of excellent line work and occasionally delved into comics, although it was the first person to actually go into it was cartoonist Alfred Gerrada from the Times, who once in a while went into multiple panel cartoons, okay? But the first adventure cartoons were done by people like Charles Cassano, not very good drawings, but at least his heart was in the right place. And the first of the really good people was Ġorġ Mallia, the one that most Maltese know from Id-Denfil, okay? Who died a couple of years ago. And he did a number of comic strips for the Times, historical comic strips, like that's right, Malta and all the rest of them. But he did comic strips, okay? And in fact, when in the 1980s, early 80s, when there was a boom of Maltese comics, when we, myself and my colleagues, decided we really wanted to have Maltese comics, okay? And that was around about the 1980s. Comic Satar was the first. Victor Fenech was the editor, and he convinced Ġorġ Mallia to reformat the comic strips. He translated them with him into Maltese, and the first 2-3 Comic Satar, first two, were by Ġorġ Mallia. I did number 3. And I think it was the very first comic book in Maltese that was configured as a comic book. In other words, there weren't comic strips changed into comic books, but actually used the spreads, the 2-page spreads, and all the rest of it. It was called Ada, tomorrow. Ambitiously so, okay? And then there were a few others. There was another one by Ġorġ Mallia, a couple of others, and that's it. Comic Satar died. Victor Fenech said that they died because he couldn't find any more artists to actually take care of it, which was very true. We were trying to really get the comics going, and we started something called Avventura, which was a monthly comic, but which followed the format of the English anthology comics. So we had 3 comic series in it. Joe Spider Farrugia, Norman Borch, and myself, Cacciatur. It lasted 2 issues. By number 3, our financier bailed, gave up. We didn't have that much of a market, unfortunately, and that was that. This was followed by Il-Comic. Now, Il-Comic had more of a success. We followed the style, you have them, there were 9 of them, okay? We followed the style of the English comic, so weekly, in our case, bi-weekly. Okay, our sponsor was the actual printing press, Masterprint. And I remember long nights living at the printing press, separating colors by hand. This was like 82, 83, okay? And it lasted 9 issues, by which time it bumped into the usual problems we bump into in Malta. In this case, distributor problems, and issue number 9 wasn't well distributed, which meant we gave up, okay? Issue 10 was ready, we didn't print it, and we left it at that. In the meantime, there was a digest comic called Mħabba Vera, which was actually started by a man that you might know. His name was Joe Sacco, okay? So Joe Sacco. This was before he went to the States and actually became famous with Palestine, okay? He did the first 6 or 7 issues, and then he went to the States. By which time the publisher contacted me and said, will you continue this? And I said, well, not alone. But I wrote all the stories from then on we did something like 15 books. Under nom de plume, I was Josephine Tonna. Never mind. And got different artists to draw. I drew a few of those issues as well. And to all of this between 1980 and 1985. I did a comic strip called Adron Re, which was published as the first graphic novel in Maltese. And Joe Spider Farrugia did Kismet, which was also a philosophical comic strip. And that was that. And 85 was the end of that. And then 1990s, there were underground comics, okay? There was an underground comic called The Buzz, if I remember correctly. I can't remember the name now. I'm trying. I actually wrote it down this morning because I tried to remember the name, but I forgot it. And with my writing, I'm not likely to find it in any case. Okay? It was an underground comic, literally making fun of society. I have no clue who did it. Very amateur drawing, so on and so forth. Then, 1990s, late 90s as well, there was this trish, Galea. Galea was the man who is, I consider to be, the person who runs through the history of Maltese comics from the 80s onwards. He drew for us in the comic. His Chevalier shot was tremendous. We employed him to separate colors, all right, I remember. Okay. Then he went on to do Listrish, which was given away free with a Maltese newspaper, L'Orizzonte. Digest-sized comics. There were some 20 of them. So brilliant stuff. And then, of course, in the 2000s, there were comics S.T.E.A.M, Juzigat, and Galea again. So he was there all along. Until the Comic Con generation. The Comic Con generation, I consider Dean, Audrienne, Peter to be pretty much of the Comic Con generation. Fabio and Chris Legal actually put out The Golden Lizard, which was the first. They said the first graphic novel. Adron Re was the first graphic novel, mine. That was the first graphic novel in English. Coming out of Malta. Let's look at it that way. Well, Adron Re was the first. So there we go. Yes, very much so. So you're saying I'm ancient. All right, never mind. Okay.
Classic.
Okay. Look, I used to be known as the father of Maltese comics until these young Turks came along and started calling me the grandfather of Maltese comics. All right, I'll stop there. He's calling me the godfather of Maltese comics. So at least there's some hope left. But Comic Con has done more for comics in Malta than anything else that ever existed. The popularity of comics and the fostering of young authors like Dean. Okay, his rock and roll comics, his historical comics, so to speak, and of course his classroom comics now from Zatar, and Peter, of course, okay, who started off with S.T.E.A.M, with Persian, okay, with Eric Persian, okay, but now is doing some tremendous stuff, and Audrienne, of course, Audrienne, all right. You used to edit, sorry. Of course, Pilot, which was amazing, with people like Daniela, Yella, my son, okay, Sam, Malia, Claire, of course, and all the rest. Flair, Shortino. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant work, okay? Some of the best, I would say, if we were to look at it, I would consider those to be the first comics of an international level that we had in Malta, okay? And we're still there, and they're still getting there. So where are we now, okay? I'm going to start with Dean. Not because, because he's a teacher and he talks a lot, and if we don't get him out of the way to begin with, he's not going to, we're never going to stop. Okay, so what I want is Dean, Audrienne, Peter, and of course Christabelle is the up-and-coming generation. Christabelle just graduated from MCAS, she started the master's just now. Audrienne lectures at MCAS, Peter lectures at junior college and university. Dean is a teacher who has done more for comics in the classroom than anybody else I know, with his comics clubs, etc., etc. Okay, so this is the way to foster the generations.
Some of your students are my students.
Exactly. So what I want is your opinion about the Maltese comic, where it is now, where it will be. Dean.
No, as George said, so I have a degree in history of art. So I have a degree in history of art. So not just looking at art is not enough for me. I have to understand what's behind it. And that was my main thing when it came to movies, with DVD content, and now what happened with comics as well. So I've always been interested, not just in reading them, but making them and how the cookie is baked, basically. So it's a compulsion rather than something that I thought about. Comic Con came along, a friend of mine, Stefana Jews, told me, you should enter. I went to the meeting, I met Fabio and Chris and all the crew, and the rest was history.
I taught them when they were 10 years old.
Yeah. So I started doing my own work. I started teaching a year later, and they asked us if we wanted to do some break clubs, and I decided to start the comic club. It started out very small and ended up being much larger. At one time, we had about 50 students. At one time, I had to divide it into 2 breaks, one for the new students and one for the old students, which the old students still came and hung out, basically. We did 3 anthologies, all student-made books, which were all written and drew all by the students. The profit we made, we bought comics for the library. Then we also did 2 comic conventions at school, where other schools came and participated, all with the students doing their jobs. And we also made a 20-minute documentary that's still on YouTube, all made by the students. They asked questions to other teachers and students. Unfortunately, I was transferred from that school, transferred to a new school, and that had to stop.
Probably because it's a comic.
Oh yeah, no. But today, those students who are at the comic club are now producing their own comics, doing documentaries about the comic. So they're still here producing work. So in fact, one of the students today, he gave me his book, and I told him, I've been waiting 10 years for this. Thank you. I saw the Maltese comic scene as literally nothing. And the first Comic Con, we were 400 people attending. After that, the first Malta Comic Con, we were 5 foreign artists, 25 local artists, and basically we had 1-2 books that started coming out. And then it started to gain lots of steam. In the beginning, we had lots of books, but then kind of the scene died out, and it was basically me and Peter still housing the ship. This year, I'm very, very happy that I'm seeing a lot of new books. So I think it's picked up again with the newer MCAS generation, which is something that's that's something that's invigorating me. And I'm still releasing mine, but seeing newer work, newer takes, newer designs, it inspires me to do more as well.
We'll get back to you about your own works in a second. So Audrienne, pilot. And all the rest.
Yes, indeed. Pilot was something that started.
Can you hear at the back, okay?
Can you hear?
Can you hear us? Because
Yes.
we do need to shout above the noise, guys.
Yes, it's
So
true.
I hope you
actually.
can hear us, okay?
Like,
Audrienne?
so basically, it's good that Dean started off because I can fill some gaps. So George mentioned Pilot. Pilot was something that started when I was a student. Like I was like second year in MCAS ICA. Well, at the time it was art and design. ICA came later. And it was the brainchild of myself and Fleur Shortino at the time. And we just wanted to make comics, really. We've already attended like Malta Comic Con a couple of times by that point. I had exhibited myself on my own a couple of times, but I was just afraid of doing a comic of my own, and I wanted like support pretty much. So we really, really wanted to kind of like gather up as a group of people supporting each other basically and do comics that we're proud of making, And the one thing that we insisted on is that we wanted quality basically. So in this project, I grew up to be not just a comic artist, but I was also an editor. And when I needed to tell someone, listen, your comic is not making the cut, I had to be the one to kind of put them, give the message gently to them, pretty much,
Well, not that gently.
Not that gently. Not that gently. Can I ask a question? Don't take your microphone
Sure,
for a second. The point is this: as we know, comics for many years were predominantly a male-oriented area. In Malta, quite the opposite. The first comics were almost entirely, the first comics of the last generation were almost entirely female-driven. What do you say to that?
I would say I'm surprised and not surprised at the same time, because since we do not have like such a long history, like American comic books, you know, where even before when it comes to like the 40s and 50s, like a lot of like these jobs were male dominated because men were expected to do these kind of things while the woman's role was somewhere else, you know. Since
Lettering and coloring.
yes, exactly. But even like if you had to look at like the whole thing, you know, even societal, you know, back in America, back in the 40s and 50s, society was very different, and the woman's role was in kind of the kitchen, you know, and even later. So
Marvel Comics from 1961 when they exploded, to the 1970s, they had one female artist on staff, Marie Severin. Yeah, that's basically it.
I think we as Maltese people have entirely skipped this entire ordeal, you know, because as Ġorġ said, we didn't really have a comic scene before, all right?
There was Yella, there was
Exactly, exactly.
I think it wasn't until we didn't even think of gender when we were young. You know,
No.
we bought
No.
everybody's books and we were interested in
Yes.
everyone. So
Yes.
it wasn't a gender issue for us.
No, there was no gender issues. There was no societal roles dictating us to be, for example, like married off and have kids and stuff like that, you know? We could do whatever we want. Like it was like, what, early 2000s? Like, and, or mid 2010s, you know? So we weren't really bound with these things, you know? So, so for us,
That's 2 decades ago. wasn't it?
yes, I know. Don't make... I feel old. Anyway. Listen, I go in a class today and I already feel old. I have like half the Comic Con here who are like either my ex-students or my students currently. And I'm like, oh no, I'm already another generation.
My students are having kids.
Yes.
At least you don't have students there whose granddad you taught. Hey, come on. Let's continue now. Hey, okay, let's stop there.
But coming back here, so Pilot basically was made by predominantly women. So, really, first issue actually, because then we had a male artist, Daniel Marcia. He's now next to me in this Comic Con, like manning the same table, and Samuel, exactly. Like he came in also in the second issue as well. So then we kind of became a bit more mixed, you know. And I kind of wanted it that way. I didn't just want it to be just the women comics, you know.
Stories, they weren't, you can't even say they were female driven.
No, they
No,
weren't.
no.
No, but the female gaze is always
yeah.
apparent in comics done by females.
Oh, yeah.
The female gaze. You can always see it in comics.
You
that
can
have
tell
been
Wonder
created
Woman.
by- Yes.
Wonder Woman was designed by a man, for instance.
Yeah, oh yeah. Oh, let's not go there, shall we?
Because you said the female gaze. I mean, quite frankly, I've only come out as gay like a couple of years ago. So gaze. Oh, okay, all right. All right, okay. Sorry, my misunderstanding is very. Kif tabatejt. It's true actually. Like I could also see like the difference, like the way that we tell stories in comparison to someone like Dan and Sam as well. So it was also an experience.
They were just damn good stories. They were great fantasies. If you saw Pilot, I don't know if you were seen Pilot. Pilot looks like a Maltese version of metal rock, heavy metal. Extremely well done stories. If you find old copies, hold on to them. They're not easy to come across.
I still have a few. It's just that it's been so long now. No one's really interested in buying them. So they're still, you know, like it's unfortunately the fate of an old book. You know, like once it's past a certain age or a certain time, no one kind of like buys it. You know, so thank you very much. Thank you very much.
There was a time when there was a vacuum and you filled it.
But then, unfortunately, pilots faded or at least stopped because we ran into financial problems. And the one big financial problem that we found was that it stayed local, unfortunately. And the fact that it only sold like once a year, and even distribution was a problem for us. Like no one wanted to sell this comic book, you know. We were also students, we're still learning the ropes of how to do this. And just no one wanted to sell it. No one wanted to buy it anymore. So we were like, it has to kind of stop here, pretty much.
It's a comic. And this is a problem that I faced when I was young, and people were still facing up to a few years ago. The comic. the stigma of the comic. The comic, which is, in my day, was called sort of, bad for you because it had bad English. Because it was colloquial English. Because, of course, we had the Beano and the Dandy, the D.C. Thompson stable of comics in those days. So that concept was still there. That is why I'm so happy with the Comic Con and the stigma having been reversed. And what about you, Peter? Because you do comics, like Dean does comics, like Audrienne does comics.
Thank you,
How were
George.
your comics received?
I can start by beginning how I actually saw comics, and I started really
You
drawing.
need to shout, unfortunately. The microphone is there.
Sorry.
for the
Yeah. So I started working in comics. Well, I didn't work in comics. I started drawing comics in my secondary days when I was a student. So I used to do it for fun. And the problem with this is that I lived in a vacuum where comics were just for fun. I came a bit late in the game after Dean and Audrey in that case. So obviously, when I came in Comic Con, when I realized there was a Comic Con, because at the time, Dean, you started with the first Comic Con, but I hadn't even realized there was a Comic Con yet. I started to say, okay, so this is where people just show their work. And it was so much more than that. And and this happened, and it's a bit of a lesson for me as well. So each time I drew something, obviously I developed more, I learned more. I had to learn how to criticize myself more. And it started with S.T.E.A.M, my first comic. My advice is don't start your first project with a 170-pager. That's insane. That's insane. But
Steam was 170 pages.
all hand drawn on A3. Yeah, and well, at least I started with the tough ones, but it's no joke. And
Peter, Bavera in 1983 was a 48-page digest comic, okay, monthly.
oh, monthly.
Monthly, yes.
Even I wasn't that insane. My maximum comic at the time was 24 pager. That's it. We even had the limit in pilot, not more than 24. If you do something more, you need to edit it and strike out some things.
Mine was 180 too. 180. So
In my case, it wasn't my fault. It was Joe Bloody Sackos. He's the one who started at 48 pages, and so I had to continue it. And we did something like 15 or 16 copies.
Yeah, and obviously, yeah, sorry.
That's okay, it's okay, Pete. That's it. No, that's it, that's it. Go ahead.
So basically, that was my first experience of having something published. So what happened was, because I wasn't so exposed with the world and how big comics had already become, for me, comics were just this fun aspect. But the world had moved on and had grown even further, and I realized, listen, this is out there. And you realize to start to nitpick, you start to look at things that you could have done better. And from then on, I started to take it far more seriously. Unfortunately, for the first book, I mean, that's what happened. But in the meantime, I always liked to tell a story. Now, telling a story from my end as a visual artist was not just like writing a story. So my skills, basically, I taught myself how to tell the story visually, as little text as possible. So that when you do add the text, and this is what's happening in this latest comic run that I'm working on, which is Energy Quest. The text is there to complement, but not support. What I mean is that it has to have a life of its own. So the text and images are strengthened on their own, but together they're hopefully a larger project. So this is what adds a lot of, a bit more quality, I suppose, to the comic itself. Obviously, until then, training myself to learn, and obviously through critiques, thanks to George, thanks to people like Dean, and who have been on, throughout the whole process, telling me, listen, we talk to each other, we discuss things, which is, this is, and not taking it, obviously, we discuss and we don't take things personally, we learn from there, the next year we become stronger. And this is what I feel, I think such as a nice community such as the Comic Con has been growing as, because I don't feel that we're here to put spokes in our wheels at all. From my end, I'm here to help and support, and that's what I find back,
I think probably between me and you, we've got the largest collection of Maltese. Probably between us two, we've got every single Maltese comic that came out in the last 20 years, probably.
I think I have them.
I don't think I have all of them, but
They are mixed up with the 17,000 odd comics I have at home, so I don't have a clue, possibly. I think I do. I'm loving hearing Peter talk because I'm seeing the advancement of Maltese comics from just having a comic, so not having any and having a comic, whatever, to coming to a point where we're experimenting, where we are learning from each other, where the comics are developing in a style that is no longer just a comic, but Peter Magro's comic, Dean Fenech's comic, Audrienne Degiorgio's comic, okay, Christabelle Mizzi's comic. You understand? It's clear now that we have reached that point of individuation. It is no longer a question of a collective effort to have comics, but the individual stars, if you like, who can now experiment, who can now come into their own and give value, massive value, to the Maltese comics today. So where do we go from here? The Young Turks, okay? So Peter ends off and then we pass it on to Christopher.
Just one last point, because I feel that now the next step I feel is to export our Maltese brands and to, for example, if you mentioned Dean's, Fenech, Peter Magros, and the idea is that our characters, such as the characters that we've known from America, know from Britain and Japan, now it's time I feel that we can actually use our characters, export them and say, these are the Maltese comics, this is what Malta has to offer. And I think the future is very bright as well, again, with younger people coming out, and their work is, I went full Maltese there, their work is brilliant. But that's why I passed it to Christine in this, because she's the next.
The next generation.
Yeah.
All right. It's in your hands. These are already old by now. Okay?
So, yes. So as they say, they call me the new generation, which I would agree but disagree at the same time. Because along with what I've been learning, I've been always developing on other people's work and always referring back to the masters. I came from a fine art background. I've graduated with my degree in fine art. So my story starts from making pictures, okay? It was about the technique, it was about expressing myself and really understanding what I want to say with art. And this is the very defining factor that I define comics with. Because when I started to study comics during my degree, the fine art sector shook their head at me. They were like, what does fine art have to do with comics? And I stood there right in front of them and I proudly said, everything. Absolutely everything. What is fine art about? Fine art is about truly representing who we are as artists, building our story, expressing ourselves in various manners, and after all, creating something new that it will communicate to people. So what's the difference here? Absolutely nothing. So when it came to me doing my dissertation, I stood there proudly and drew comics and challenged their factors with abstract and with other techniques that traditional artists have. So my dissertation was about female representation, which loops back into their conversation, according to Maltese female artists in comic industry. So I wanted to investigate how the feminine scene is being how we are being recognized, because growing up I was mesmerized by looking at the old comics of Kiss Me Licia, Occhi di Gatto, these are Italian of course, you know, Lady Oscar, and I did not see one female name in the authors, or at least not one that really came out to me and really started to see through. And it got me thinking, how are we being accurately represented if it's being drawn by a man? I'm not saying it's wrong, but there was something that was missing. And I was severely fixated with this concept growing up. I used to draw women and comics, and I used to draw these beautiful female characters and heroines, you know. And my mother told me, they are really something, right? They have a really specific technique. And once I started to think, I was like, let me do some research, and that's where my educational part came in, where I started to learn more from MCAST, watching illustrators, and especially female teachers teaching me about what their style was about. And from then on, I actually did my dissertation, including Miss Audrienne right here, and we had a very in-depth talk about how we need to keep emphasizing any topic we need, not just female representation, any topic that we need in the narrative scene, and we keep asking what the people want. So I've seen comic books, and there's a lot of variations. But in order to keep this chain going, we need more of Comic Con. We need more events that let us shine through, female and male, because we have a beautiful, diverse atmosphere right here that I'm very proud to see. And this is how I got the inspiration to really be here and keep growing, because each day that passes, I keep drawing and I keep finding new techniques to communicate myself with, you know?
Well done. Okay, and I mean, and hearing Christabelle talk, I'm seeing, because the topic of this conversation is the state of Maltese comics today, okay? And I'm seeing what happened abroad. I'm seeing abroad, comics were first drawn by comic fans, okay? So people who actually read comics, enjoyed them, and copied them, okay? And that's how it grew, until slowly an academic analysis crept into comics. And I've seen this in international conferences, etc., etc. Obviously, I've studied comics. In fact, I can replicate something to you that you said, Christabelle. The very first master's in media and communications from the University of Malta was mine. And it was about using comics in the classroom. And my examiners were Professor Peter Saracino-Nglot, Professor Peter Vassallo, and Xavier Kirkop. So I will not go into the reaction to me and doing my first master's in comics from the University of Malta. So we'll leave it at that. But the point is, we are now at a point where the young comic creators are not just comic fans, but like all of us here, and Christabelle is a good example of the future, okay? We're also comic students. We are understanding how the comic techniques work and how they develop. And in fact, we do need some sort of way of procreating this. I lived for many years in Sweden, in Malmö, and I was always extremely jealous because there they have a comics academy. They have a comic school, okay? It's called the Serieskolan, and I was the first speaker of the year to the first years every single year for many, many years. And it was fun to talk to them, seeing about 40 young people who are going to spend 2 years doing nothing but study how to do comics. It's amazing. And maybe that is the next step here in Malta. Dean, I'm going to pass the baton on to you.
This is something that us four are all something that we're in unison with, and we talk a lot about this. Basically, we're not only comic creators, we're comic academics as well. We study comic art just like you would study a Da Vinci or a Picasso. So for us, so basically, we're the guys that not only are creating our comics, we're passing on the knowledge. And we have different spheres, be it secondary schools, be it MCAS, plans of maybe comic courses. We've done multiple. Me and Peter have worked on 2 together. There will be. Wait.
Dean, maybe it's good that the audience knows that in the Masters in Fine Arts, I actually give a 13 credit unit on graphic novels. Peter has done it, poor guy. So it's there at academic level as well. Okay, so we do actually, comics have gone into academia, they've gone into our university, they are going in our schools, as Dean said, etc., etc. Okay, so Dean, if you finish off, then we'll open to the audience and then we'll have to ask.
No. Basically, is that making comics is easy. You get a pen, you get a paper, and you make comics. Making good comics is not. Jack Kirby said, comics will break your heart. And that's what happens. I've seen lots of people do a comic and stop, or tell you they're going to do a comic and don't do it. Because comics are hard. Illustrations are easier. So people tend to switch more to that. Crazy people keep on doing comics. So, people that can do it. So, it's important not just to, oh, I do comics. Oh, really? What's your work? Oh, no, I draw Batman and Superman. That's not making comics. That's doing comic characters. So, making comics actually takes the academic study. So, part of it is actually reading comics and not keeping tied to, oh, I read manga, or I read female artists, or I read everything. My car manual has comics in it which I read. I've got Das Kapital by Karl Marx as a comic. All right, there's Bible stories as a comic. I try and read everything.
I read the airplane instructions.
So, Scott McCloud said, and probably this is a good way to stop it, is follow everybody. No, he goes, study everybody, follow no one, make your own path.
Okay, I'm going to see if anybody in the audience would like to contribute to this conversation before we have a last round with all the speakers. Anybody? Would you like to contribute anything? Would you like to say anything to us? Maybe contribute a question or a comment about what we're doing. Yes, of course. Can we pass this on?
I don't think it's on, actually. All right.
So that way you can actually be on
All right. I think honestly the main difficulty aspect of creating comics and creating illustrations, like the separation, is that an illustration is a static image that you are looking at, but with comics you have to really knack your brain and just see, okay, I'm creating a narrative, but these illustrations need to be really, really based on this narrative, and they have to be relevant as well. So that's where the difficulty aspect, I feel, comes.
The difference is a unit for an illustration is the panel. A unit for a comic is, let's say, a page, because that's what or a sequence. So when you do a comic, you're not only thinking of a panel, you're thinking of the page. What comes next on the next page? If it's on the left side of the page or right side. If it's web comics, you know, how it's going to be presented. All right? So that's the difference. So just thinking of a panel is bad. You need to think of it as a whole.
Like, there's also like this cognitive aspect that we need to pay attention to when you are looking at these images and your mind is stitching them together. The interactivity that happens between you and the page, you know, that's what makes a comic. An illustration, you look at it, you consume it, it might move a little bit in your brain, but that's it. A sequence is a completely different topic.
McCloud stole a word from Gestalt psychology in order to define that, which is closure. In other words, being able to make the imaginative leap needed from one panel to the next. Okay? In anime, in animated cartoons, you have the tweens, but you don't have that in comics. In comics, you have the tableaus, which link together in a way that tell the story. So, of course, your point is very, very well made. Would anybody else would like to comment about what you said, Christabelle? Yes?
From my point of view, it is true that when we are making a comic, we kind of split it into different panels. But for instance, with my research, I am trying to mend it all in one image. Because this is like TV and film, okay? We see them in different frames at times, and those are the panels. But if you are to really have a good way of illustrating a scene that contains a lot of action and be able to merge it into one full image where the reader or viewer in this case can read through it and through its various elements, then that's when we know that representation has completely succeeded with the symbolism and iconography.
Thank you. Basically, to sum up what you asked, is that comics are movement because of the different panels. I go one step further. Every panel should have the quality of a single painting. And paintings such as Turner's, all right, for example, are moving. They are dynamic. So if you want to have a very dynamic comic in general, treat every panel as if it is a single painting moving. Then the organic movement will come on its own. And it's not just saying from this, obviously we have to fill in the blanks between the gutter and one panel and the other. However, it will definitely enhance the comic if it is dynamic in its nature. So that's what I...
And in fact, I would consider Turner to have been a very good comic artist. Okay? In fact, if you look at people like Bill Sienkiewicz today or Dave McKeon, you're going to see the massive influence of people like Turner on them. And of course, but Alex Ross is more, how to speak, detailed, Renaissance, yes. Whereas Bill Sienkiewicz, Dave McKeon, they're definitely Turner and all the rest of them, but telling stories. Okay, so that's the wonderful thing. Look them up if you don't know them. Dave McKeon, Bill Sienkiewicz, absolutely brilliant stuff. Yes?
May I just say something? There's one thing I slightly disagree on, that every image has to be a painting. It depends on what the panel is trying to portray. If it's a still image, if it's an image that's going to be an establishing shot, yes, it needs to give all the information. But if it is a panel that's trying to depict movement or is trying to depict something like more of a thought or something, it does not actually have to be a painting. Like, it can be just zoom lines sometimes, you know? It could be like 3 panels of just nothing, for example, and the big time, you know? Pretty much, yes. Yes, but I wouldn't consider it like like if you're talking about a painting, like a modern painting, like yes. Ah, okay, all right, okay. No, that is where we start.
This might not have been picked up on the microphone, but we're actually having quite an argument here. Okay.
Sometimes they're just a sound effect, for example.
Yes, exactly.
Indeed. Indeed. Do we have any more comments by the audience about the state of Maltese comics right now, or anything at all to do with academe? Yes, I will need to pass them out because we want to pick you up.
Just one thing, more Maltese comics. That's the thing. We're having comics which are very good illustrated. I think Dean has done some as well, and you, at your age, before, even in SATA, you did used to do. But the only thing I see is, first of all, it's a struggle. I think here in Malta, even me as a lecturer, it was a struggle when I started. Audrienne can vouch for it, because even teaching graphics, and that time we tried to introduce some things, they were really versed on comics from the beginning. But it is always a struggle, yeah. Well, but the thing is this, it was always a struggle to teach, okay, or to at least make part or show the students how to do these things. Although I'm not a comic artist, I love comics, and you know, okay? I love animation. I started the animation course at MCAST. So the thing is this, it's a bit hard at first to start up, but then once the ball is rolling, I think it's done. I think what we need more here in Malta now is Maltese comics. That is written in Maltese, and the stories are Maltese. That's it.
Right? The actual fact, that's a good point, but the actual fact, when we talked about Maltese comics here, I was thinking of comics produced in Malta. So they could be in English. We are bilingual as a race. Obviously, we always did ours in Maltese, but there's nothing wrong with having them in English. If anything, for outreach, for going out across. Yeah. Yes. We need to go to the last round.
So, last thing. Maybe I'm talking like this because I was born in Australia. But I don't think just because we're Maltese, we should write about Maltese things. I've written about Maltese things. The majority of my comics are about Maltese things. But I also enjoy doing space operas and superheroes. So I think we're a global society, and Maltese perspective is very important, but we shouldn't just limit ourselves to Maltese. And that's where the Maltese language is a hindrance. Exactly.
Okay, I think unless there's any more comments from the audience, we're going to go for one last quick fire round, okay? Since Dean hasn't spoken at all, we'll leave him till the end. I'm always pulling his leg, always. These guys are always used to me pulling people's legs non-stop, and I didn't mention Satire because I was the editor of Satire for 14 years with Victor Fenech, okay? And I remember introducing so many comics that Victor once said that if he wasn't the other editor, I would turn Satire into a full comic, which is probably true. I had people like Roberta Baiada, Sandra Bela, Sam, my son, Mallia drawing, Victor Police, of course, Mark Cicluna. Yes, he was brought to my room by a teacher with a portfolio. And I remember grabbing the portfolio, writing a story for one of the pictures so I could actually publish it in the next edition. So yes, these things. Satire, of course, was a very good springboard for young artists, and I'm happy it still is. It still is. I'm going to go for one last quick round with comments by the individual panelists, a very, very short comment, beginning with Christabelle, and then going all the way, and I'm sorry, ending with Dean. But, so there we go. So there we go.
I personally think that in the end, comics have been one of the main things that have really taught me a lot of lessons, have represented a lot of statements that I believe nowadays. And as an artist, it was a really incredible experience to keep studying it, to keep exploring what factors we can challenge and how they can be read by our audiences. One of my various comics ideas is to basically represent myself as the opposite version of who I am today, and to see how people will react to the seller and the artist, knowing me as an artist and how I am, and the character being the opposite of me.
Can I say something quickly? We need this. You know, people like Craig Thompson, people like David Mazzucchelli, people like, you know, all of these people are doing incredible work in what we call autobiographical comics, okay? Like Blankets, Habibi, and all the rest of them. We don't have them in Malta yet. So maybe it's about time that the Maltese psyche by young artists like Christabelle, will actually be represented in this new area also in Maltese comics.
And basically from this, I really want to see how I can impact my audience and how I can grow as an artist in skill. And in the end, I really want to prove a point how fine art and comics are one. That's it, because I really want to push this idea that narrative comics and these visual art pieces, whether in panels or not, are a very impactful communicative platform that are going to affect me and who's to come after me, for sure. And
Peter, thank you, Christabelle, and all the best to you, okay? Right.
Following on Christabelle's point on fine art, I think that's a very important aspect, because I feel that we're seeing this today when people are coming to Comic Con. It's getting bigger. I think it's fantastic. We need to win people over from every area. So if comics have to be proved as fine art, to a sense that, listen, there's not too many different things. You've got perspective, you've got human figure, you've got light and shade, you've got storytelling and narration. I've been to Florence, shading, and they've been using paintings as narrative for years, hundreds of years. And if not thousands, you know? And the point is that they've been with us really in our psyche for a while. So the point is, it's what binds us together as humans, telling stories. And it could be in any format. But if that's what it takes to prove if it's fine art or not fine art, and I agree that they are, this is how we can grow, especially in Malta. And really in everywhere else. But I feel that it needs to be worked on a bit more here. And
excellent. Thank you, Peter. Audrienne?
So, there was actually a point made in this discussion, which wasn't mentioned again, and that is exportation. One of the things that Pilot made it fall flat on its ass is that it stayed local. And unfortunately, I think that is something that we cannot afford anymore, because while I support Maltese comics and making comics and whatnot, we still need a wider audience for it to survive. Therefore, for example, let me talk about mine. So right now I started a comic, or I'll be starting a comic next year, and now I'm releasing a teaser. My plan is to make enough money in order to make a website, upload it there, basically, and start actually expanding also into other platforms like Tapas and these other places, all right? Also, because I actually wanted to address Maltese comics, I was actually planning to translate from English to Maltese because I wanted to be available in my own native language. It is a comic about my experiences in a more, not fantastical, but in a more like telling it through different characters, all right? And I wanted to reflect in my own language, all right? So this is something that I'm working on like on my side because exportation is so important, all right? That if we're gonna tell a story, I don't want people bound by money. I have a lot of students, listen, miss, I can't afford, for example, to buy this comic, you know? I have a lot of people like, I can't afford this. I'd like to help you, but I can't afford it. So you know what? I'll make it free. If you want to buy a collectible, for example, you can, which is what how much of the comics change today, all right? We buy comics as collectibles. Most of the time we read them online, okay? So, you know what? Have a collectible once a year so that you can actually save up for it. But for the rest of the year, if you'd like to read a good story, come to the website. We all have a phone, don't we? All right? So, yeah, that's where I'll stop. Thank you, guys.
2 points. First one, convincing people fine art and comics are the same thing. You don't need to. Don't need to. Comics are good. Comics are good on their own. People who don't want to get that, they're not seeing the point of comics.
We have 3 minutes left. We do not have time to argue. So what we're going to do is we're going to be listening to the same, you know, to the different viewpoints, which is wonderful. If you see them fighting out there, you know what's happened. But for the time being, we're going to stop there. Different viewpoints are brilliant.
So basically, my idea is, I make comics even if nobody's reading them. So that's the first thing. The audience I want to please is myself, no one else. If nobody else likes it, doesn't like it, it's their problem. What I think is that in the beginning of the Comic Con we didn't have, but we have today, is support. We need to support each other, which we are doing. I think at least the veteran artists we're supporting each other much better than we did in the past. For example, we're giving each other critical, informed critiques, which comes out of love for the media and for ourselves. For example, we need to start working more together. And also, then the other thing is the actual audience. If you want more Maltese comics, buy more Maltese comics. And that's basically what I think.
Good point. Guys, this was an incredibly interesting discussion, which, as always happens with discussions, basically, just as it was starting, it has to stop, okay? But it does not mean that we don't think about it. I think if I were to take the gist of what we got from here is that we are at an extremely interesting and exciting phase in the development of the local industry, okay? Yes, the market is what it is. The limited amount of books that can be bought by Maltese does not make it justifiable. Remember, if I write a novel, I might have 500 copies published at best these days. It used to be 1,000 in the past. People are reading less. It's now 500 copies. That is the maximum that I can do. But writing a novel will take me a year. Doing the same amount of pages as a graphic novel will take me 5. So that makes it much less feasible to publish for the local industry only. So the idea of moving away from just the local industry, but having the local product, which is very important, is extremely essential at this point in time. I think we moved from discussing what comics are, what we've all done for comics, what it's about the Maltese comic industry, to the fact that we are now at a stage where young comic creators, not so young comic creators, even ancient comic creators like myself, all right, are at a point where we are looking to the future with an experimental eye, with an adventurous eye, with the idea of us not being any different from any other country that produces comics. There used to be something which used to hurt me in the past, which used to be said regularly. It's okay for Malta. We don't say that anymore, and that is the best thing that's ever happened to us. We are living in a cosmopolitan society. We are living in a world-class society, And our comics are definitely world class as they are and will continue to be. Thank you very much for all of you. Thank you to the panelists. And we will be extremely happy if you pass the word around and tell people about Maltese comics and go buy them. Thank you so much. Excellent.